I've done my due diligence. I've prepared the interviewee. I've created great questions. I made sure the interview is conducted perfectly the way you just taught me. Now it's time for me to come through the data. How do I make sure that the truth emerge and encumbered from my biases and without my preconceived notion, or even the answer that I hope for leaking through the data?
Yeah, that's another great question. There's a lot to answer there, and more, not because you double-barreled it, but because there's just a lot to answer there. See, I was listening. But I'll just give a top line on that. I believe, in my experience, and it's been many years that I've been doing research, that one goal of the research is to confirm or disprove ingoing hypotheses. So you might be starting out someplace and you want to see, is that the truth or not, or is there some gradation of that, which there often is. I personally am agnostic on the type of research that I'll do. I don't have to be an expert in a certain topic. You know, I'm not a human resource person, but I'm a people person, and I can speak to people and integrate in whatever it is that I'm charged to find out. For myself, somehow, because I'm so present with the person I'm interviewing with, I'm not thinking about what the client would like to know or where they hope that this would go. I may not be as successful at that in my personal life, and maybe I don't have to, but my research depends on it. So somehow I come there with a filter and just try and put it out of my head. Not always easy to do, but that gets back to being present, absolutely being present.
Hello, Sue. How are you?
Hi, Junior. So happy to be with you.
The pleasure is absolutely mine. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since we got connected and acquainted on LinkedIn. I always love these moments when a digital relationship evolved into the next stage or the next phase of its growth. So thank you for being here. I want to start by giving a little bit of context to maybe new listeners about what this is before giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself. So, Empathy Led is a show brought to you by the Grio agency. And the idea behind the show is really to have open, candid, meaningful, hopefully insightful conversations about the power of empathy to make us better leaders, better entrepreneurs, better marketers, and of course, better people. And I couldn't be more excited to have somebody like you who is a professional researcher and probably somebody who's very fluent in people to lead us in this conversation. Welcome to the show, Sue.
Thank you, Junior. And I've never used that phrase, fluent in people, or so I think I'm going to steal it from you.
Please do. So I'm always fascinated by the pieces of people's life story that they choose to put together to tell a coherent story about themselves. So what are the pieces of your life puzzle that can help us and help the audience best understand who you are and how you became the person that you are today?
I love that question. It's a different take on tell me about yourself. I will go back to the whole idea of nurture and nature. And I think it's in my nature to be very people-oriented, to be very outgoing. I'm an extrovert. My mom, who's still with us, was a nursery school teacher and director of the program. And I learned so much from her about how to deal with people, because she had to deal with tons of parents who, you know, either thought their child was the best or needed something else. So she would come home and tell stories, not complaining, mind you, but tell stories. And I was soaking it in and trying to understand how did she balance really what they say is the truth, which is this side, that side, and somewhere in the middle. And so I really learned a lot about empathy from her. I also had opportunities to be at her school and see her in action and see how she sort of mediated challenges with people. So that's one aspect. I really think for me, it's nature, but it's also the nurture from my mom, as an example. The second thing is, growing up, I always was the type of person, I think I still am, where I like all kinds of people. And I know most everyone could say that, but it's really true. I remember when I was in high school, there were all these cliques. There were the jocks and the artsy people and the academics, and I'm not going to say druggies because that wouldn't be nice. That's not nice. But, sort of maybe a little bit on the fringe. And I was friends with everyone. And I think when you're in high school, you gravitate towards a clique. But I didn't do that because, if I think about it now, I feel like I always found merit in all kinds of people. It's fun. You learn something from them. It just, opens your horizons. So I've always tried to be with different people that can complement myself or be similar. But for me, I don't want everyone to be similar to me, because then I think you stop learning. At least that's how I've looked at it over the time. So I think all of these things bubble up to who I am today for sure. And I bet you there's a ton of other influences, and maybe we'll get to those too.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really a good framework and a good reference point for us to understand how you arrived at the place, and perhaps what informed even your career path and your career choice. So we all go to dinner parties and cocktail parties, and inevitably the question most people lead with is, what do you do? How do you typically explain to people what you do for a living?
Oh, wow. I'm a little bit different in that I mix it up. Maybe the core is always the same. I think there were times when I would say I was a mad scientist when I was working on the quant side, because I had all this data that I had to manage, and people too, clients and staff. I would also say now and then that I'm a storyteller, but I usually start with that I spend a lot of time thinking about people and people and relationships, and it can be personal, it can be business. Often they're the same. I'm blessed that I've worked with some of the same people for, if you can believe it, 20 plus years. I even have a work husband that I've worked with for 30 something years. Don't tell my husband though, he knows him, it's okay. Or the fleeting relationships that I build with participants for qualitative research. So after many years on the quantitative side, I hung a shingle for our company, RTI Research, and I'm a senior vice president, director of qualitative services, and I moderate in-depth interviews and focus groups. And I like to explain that my magic sauce is that left and right brain synergy, as I call it. So I hone my left brain with all the quantitative analysis that I did for many years. And my right brain is honed with my people skills and my creative outlook. And my creative outlook comes from being a lover of art and being a mixed media artist when I'm not doing work. Wow. So that's what I do when I help clients. And, when I was on the quantitative side, Junior, people would always say, oh, you just deal with data all day. And I'd say, actually, well, that's obviously very important. People pay us to collect survey information and deal with the data. It's all about relationships, because people want to work with people they like. They don't have to be best friends with you, but they hopefully will respect you and like you. And one of the nicest compliments that I received recently after working on a project was at the end of my recommendation on LinkedIn. The client said, and after all these good things, she said, and to boot, if you talk to Sue anytime during the day, it's going to brighten your day. I mean, what else could you want, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I love this idea of relationships. And I think you mentioned earlier that some of the relationship that you have with the qualitative participants are fleeting relationships. We know relationships take time to build, but in your field, I'm sure you have to jumpstart that process and really accelerate what otherwise should take weeks and maybe years. How do you achieve that?
Well, I think it starts with the immediate hello. So again, I'm going to use that word blessed, that I've been blessed that I would say 98% of the people that I interview for qualitative are very nice people from what I can ascertain at the beginning. Or maybe I shouldn't say nice. Hopefully everyone's nice, but they're happy to be there. Yes, they get paid as participants, but they're very excited to join the conversation, whether it's business leaders or consumers. And so it starts with just connecting eye to eye, looking and smiling. You know, people will say to me, do you always smile? Mostly I do. Okay, some of my colleagues know I don't always smile, but I try to. And I always try and think of the good side of things. It's getting on camera when I'm doing Zoom interviews, as an example, and right away making eye contact and showing them that I'm excited to be here, that I'm showing up. And I don't mean just showing up that I'm here, but I'm showing up for you, participant. And before I bring them on camera, I usually talk about something. It can be something very benign, as what part of the country you're in and how's it going for you. Or it could be something on their profile that I've read about a hobby they have or an interest, and just talk about it for a moment. And then right away, we've had a little conversation. So when we start the conversation, the real conversation, we've established something. Yes, it's not the same as being out with a person for an hour and then, of course, longer for a relationship, but it just sets the tone. And that's why people in my field, and me included, feel very strongly that we have to have some time to bond with the respondent or the participant before we start, because it's all about trust. They know you want to be with them. You want to hear their story. You need to be present when you're with them. And while they know it's an interview, I always try and make it as if it's a conversation. Yeah. Not easy to do when you've got to rapid fire questions at people, because you've got a conversation that's 60 minutes long, but it has 90 minutes of questions in it. So you figure it out as you go along. But isn't that what we do when we have conversations with people we really know? I mean, yes, some people you know like the back of your hand and you finish their sentences, but other people, you just sort of, the dynamics change as you're talking, hopefully for the better, but you just figure it out as you go. And that's part of the skill, I think, of being a people person, being able to pivot and figure out what to say when and so forth, when to interject. It's all about them. It's not about me, but I obviously want to make them comfortable with me. And so I have different ways that I do that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I find in my experience talking to people and interviewing people, I think the first prerequisite is to really be present with the person, enough to be able to do all the things that you talked about, enough to be able to pay attention to the body language, to the tone in their voice, to their response to a question, whether or not they're comfortable or uncomfortable answering a specific question that you have. It requires a great deal of self-awareness and a great deal of humility to be there and to make it about the person that you are interviewing and not make it about yourself.
Yeah, certainly, Junior. I think when we talked before, I briefly gave you a little analogy where I always think of doing interviews as being on Broadway. And so when I was a kid, I was always doing one-act plays for my family, my great-grandmother, and my specialty was Hello, Dolly, for those old enough to know Hello, Dolly. So I would sing and dance and have a little show and change characters and all of that. So when I go on Broadway for my qualitative interviewing, I'm not the star. The respondent is the star. I'm the supporting actress. And the supporting actress is supporting the star. So I need to help them come out of their shell if they have a shell, or tone it down if I need them to tone it down. Is not really the right word. Maybe move on to the next area that we have to talk about. But it's really all about them. Yet I'm a person too, and it's a human interaction, and it is a conversation of sorts. So I will interject at different times, either a little bit off the path or perhaps insert some humor that's appropriate at the time, and then, bring it back right away. Because, humor is in us, and I think it's natural for a lot of people. It's certainly for me, although some people don't think I'm that funny. But, you make a witty comment, or you make a joke, or you pick up something they said before. I mean, I'll just give you a real quick example. I was talking to a doctor last year, a specialist, and I asked her, how do you get your patients to follow the regimen? It seems from what you've said, it's difficult. You're, paraphrasing your words. And she said something like, I tell them, you better hope that you die before you get the side effects, because the side effects are horrible. And she gave a big grin, because she thought, that's strange to say as a doctor. And then I grinned, and we both started laughing. And so then I said, that I'm laughing and chuckling because the magnitude of what you're saying is enormous. And so we just kept going on that and moved on from there. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. For me, there are already two very powerful parallels between the work that you do and what you have to do in order to be successful, and my world as a marketer and as people who is fundamentally responsible for helping other companies create, deliver, and communicate value. The first of which is that idea of being able to jumpstart the trust process with a customer, right? We talked about the fact that trust takes time to build. But when somebody is doing business with you, we are not always afforded the luxury of time. So we have to be mindful and savvy enough to understand how to jumpstart that trust process. And what I heard you say is that it's very much the same way, that you are with these people for a very short period of time, and you have to find a way to connect and to relate and to jumpstart that trust process. And then the second piece that you mentioned that I thought was also a wonderful parallel was this idea of, you are not the hero of the story. They are the hero. You are the protagonist. And I think his name is Donald Miller, now made famous this idea of building a story brand, which essentially says exactly what you said, that we are not the story in the stories that we are trying to tell when we build brands. We are the protagonist. Our customers are the hero on a mission to do something, to accomplish something with aspirations and hope. And our job is to make sure that we can help them and accompany them and help them be successful.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think some of the trust aspect to build it quickly with clients, as an example, is being authentic. Do they sense that the person, me, is authentic when I'm talking with them, when I'm emailing them, which is emails can be hard to read in terms of understanding the sentiment that's really there. And now, of course, you might not know if someone's authentic if you've only spoken to them once, but over a short period of time, is Sue acting in a way that seems authentic, and it seems like she's being true to herself? And part of that is helping us, meaning the company, the client, and that builds a trust as well. So, generally speaking, I am pretty much the same all the time. All right, off camera now. And in other situations, I might be a little sillier, sure. But I'm basically the same person. And I try and show that, again, getting back to the interviews. And very important, though, is to mirror the person. So whether I'm mirroring a qualitative participant, or mirroring a client, or mirroring my CEO, as an example, I need to feel them out. What are they about? And I also have to, you talk about jumpstart, I have to do that very quickly and get a sense of, are they an extrovert? Do they talk fast? Are they an introvert? And sometimes they might just be a little shy coming on the camera, and you think they're an introvert, but they're not. Other times, maybe you start to sense, ooh, they're taking longer to answer the question. So I need to hang back and not talk as quickly and interrupt their thinking process with a probe. Sometimes it's the counting to 5, 6, 7, or whatever it is,
Mm.
or it's just looking at them friendly with a little smile and letting them know that they can take their time. So mirroring with whomever we're talking to, I think, is very important, and that can come into play with empathy as well when you're dealing with someone, personal or otherwise, that is going through a rough patch. Try and figure out, sometimes it's asking them, what do you need from me to help you? That could be a client. It could be someone who's just had a death in the family. It could be, so many situations.
Yeah. I mean, I think as human beings, we always tell our clients, people want to do business with people that look like them, but more importantly, that espouse the same worldview as them, people that understand who they are, who understand the challenges, the struggles, but also their hopes and the dreams and the aspirations. And I think if we do our job well as marketers, then we take the time to understand what those things are so that we can put our product and our services in the context of those people's lives instead of just listing off all the features and the benefits of what we do. Somebody pointed out recently to me that the most important part of selling was actually listening, because in that you get all the clues and the cues that you need to not only make the person feel seen, but to be able to help them make the progress that they are seeking to make in the first place.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times, Junior, with clients and even colleagues, but let's just talk about clients as you are, the number of times we've had a call where they wanted to get my opinion on something and I just let them talk. And yes, I'll interject here and there, or we'll come to some consensus, but they're doing the majority of the talking because I need to understand what the challenges are that they're facing, either in their role, as a stakeholder, or with their other stakeholders, or some marketing or business pressure, environmental pressure. And when we finish the call, they thank me so much for everything I've shared with them. Well, okay, I did share some things, but they did most of the talking. Gets back to doing qualitative interviewing, where they should be doing most of the talking, not, the moderator.
Yeah.
Easier said than done sometimes, but I think that's the trick. And I don't mean a trick as in trick or treat, let's fool someone, but rather how to deal with people and giving them the space they need to share what they need to share with you, because sometimes they figure it out themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think human beings are actually very good at detecting inauthenticity and detecting when they are being misled. I think it's part of our evolutionary conditioning that we have to develop the uncanny ability to read people very quickly, because our survival at times may depend on it. So I completely agree with you. So in my role as a marketer, I have to be a researcher as well. I have to do market research. But because I'm not trained in that, I am sure there are many, many, many mistakes that I make in that process. So if you were to advise me on becoming a better researcher, what would you say?
Ask a lot of questions as you're starting your research or your search. So I think it's always starts with the business objectives, not even the research objectives, but the business objectives. What does the business team or teams need to learn? And what are the reasons for that? That could give you some clues. What information do they have already? When was the last time they updated it? So do we need to include like a redo on some of that information again, something about the marketplace, or was it very recent? Today things change so constantly, one could argue you need to update all the time. So it starts with the questions. I will then or people I'm working with will do some of my own searching on my own on the internet, let's say, about their competitors. Usually that's shared with me during the briefing. I'll always ask, and their clients are very happy to give you past information. We're doing a very large test right now where we asked for information, and when we got it, we had like 6 briefs in our email that kept coming and coming. But you know what? We looked at all of them. And so that when we gave the first deliverable, we got back an email that said, awesome. I can tell that your team and you spent a lot of time integrating in everything we've talked about to date and the learnings we had prior. So asking questions even before the research is paramount. The other thing is every client, of course, I'm sure you know, Junior, wants to be involved in different ways. They want updates regularly, or they don't. Find out, this is whether you're a researcher or you work somewhere else in some other industry. Find out how they like to work. How do they like to communicate? What kind of updates do they want? And always, I think, feel like the worst question is the one that's not asked. So if we don't understand something, or I don't understand something, we send an email. If it's a short thing, maybe we can cover it in email. If it's a bigger thing, can we just please jump on the phone? Because it's going to be most efficient for everyone. So, and besides all of that, before we start crafting whatever we're going to ask in our surveys, whether it's quant or qualitative, as I'm mostly doing now, what are the things they must get out of this research? There's always all these ancillary things, which means, things scope grows and grows and grows. What do they absolutely need to get out of this? So you make sure that you're going to deliver on that. Yes, it's wonderful to deliver on the other things, the secondary or tertiary things, but really honing in and focusing on what they've got to get at. And that's something I always do in the qualitative research, because as I alluded to before, I'm scheduled with a 1-hour session with someone, but I've got 90 minutes of questions. Okay, we can try it. Maybe I'm wrong. Sometimes I am, but not so much on length. And we figure it out. All right, based on the first one, we need to cut this out. Or, you know what, these two questions are really duplicative, so we don't need to do that. So those are some of the things that I think about for doing good research, or how to approach research. And then there's all the technical things that come in there, or the people skills, beyond that.
You mentioned that as part of this process, you also do some research online. What are some of the sites, tools that you use in that process that could help me, certainly, but anybody else listening, for them to have some good, accurate data?
The first one, you may have heard of this, Dr. Google, I consult. You can put in, as you know, any question, and very specific about who are the top competitors, what have you. If the clients give me a list of their competitors, I'll go to their websites to check it out, to just get a little more familiar with how that business works, or who they profess their strengths are, and so on and so forth. If there's something specific to an industry that I'm working on, let's say it's on human resources, I might try and go to some industry rags on human resource sites. So I don't necessarily have one specific place that I go. I tailor it towards what the questions are at hand. I need to answer for myself to feel prepared for the next stage, and what I have to do for the deliverable. And of course, I almost hesitate to bring it up here so it doesn't steal all the time, but we know Dr. Chat GPT is on the horizon. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that, what it does short term, and maybe more importantly, long term. But that's going to be another source, I'm sure, and it already is already for people. Have
you personally used the tool ChatGPT?
No, I haven't yet, mostly because we have very, very high security hurdles at RTI, and it's something I need to speak to our IT director about. I've read very positive things about sort of being a Google assist, and I think that, whatever can make someone more efficient, whether it's myself or other team members, that's great. The question is, what are the negatives, if any? I believe they're still in a beta testing. I've read some things about inaccuracies in the information you get back. I was in the car this morning early, and a small business segment came on the radio, and the person said that it's sort of that the Chat GPT takes an average of the information it finds with its bot tentacles, and then comes up with something, and it's not always accurate. In certain instances, that may not matter. I read something online that said someone was doing some research on a medical type of thing, and what they played back to their client, a whole bunch of it wasn't accurate. Yeah. So how do we decide what's accurate and not? It's not like, I'm not trying to say it's like Wikipedia where I can just go in to, look up Junior on Wikipedia and change something, but what's the truth and what's not the truth? So I think it's going to evolve. I think we keep seeing things with technology evolve that ultimately help people, including researchers and marketers. So I look for more to come. Right now, I'm watching closely to see how people are using it. I haven't used it yet, and just the last thing I'll say about it is, what's the domain in terms of information? If I put information in, does it become public domain? I think it does, because the bot's going to then include that information. And if this is my client's information that I've gotten from a research study, do I want to put that in? So I think that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
But, it's something for sure to watch.
No, I mean, I feel like I'm so glad we took this detour, because some of the questions that you raised are certainly things for us to consider as we get excited about the technology and its potential. I think we don't always spend the time asking ourselves some of these more pointed, important questions that need to be asked and need to be answered. The tool is certainly in its infancy, and it's going to grow and it's going to improve. But whether you're using ChatGPT or not, the quality of your research is still dependent in large part on the quality of your queries, the questions that you ask, how you prompt it. Sure. And that's not only a science, but also an art that if you are to be remotely good at research, you have to master. So once again, for my selfish need, what are some of the common pitfalls I have to watch out for as I build questions for a survey, as I think about queries to get the data that I need for my research?
Well, if you're doing qualitative research because you're interviewing a prospect to try and figure out what they need, or some other stakeholder on a customer that you're already working with, open-ended questions are important in how you phrase them. I was trained for qualitative work. Try not to ask closed-ended questions. Don't ask questions that will get an immediate response of yes or no, but rather stick with I hope I said this right, the who, what, where, and when, so that they have to give an open-ended response and hopefully something that's a little more robust. So that's one thing to watch out for. Again, we covered let people talk. They may go on a little bit, and then when you need to, interrupt. And I always set it up like in an interview, I may interrupt you, and I tell them why that's going to happen. And in fact, when I'm doing qualitative interviewing, I'm always telling the respondent at the beginning, not just the ground rules that I'm sure most moderators give about what's going to happen and we're recording and so forth, but I also always let them know what I'm doing. So they, again, getting back to being present with them and that I'm listening, that they know when I'm looking down on my screen, I'm not looking at the grocery list my husband just sent me, but that I'm looking at a question that one of the client observers or the researcher observers has just sent in. And by and large, they appreciate that. Yeah. So other things to think about is really just managing the time in terms of the questions. Are questions duplicative? Sometimes you don't know that, especially in qualitative research, until you try out your first or second interview, because you and the client may think the question is very different, or you feel it's not different, but they insist to ask it. And then when you get one or two interviews under your belt, you can say, I think we're getting the same thing. I don't need to ask it twice. And then hopefully they'll agree about that.
One of the things I have to watch out for that I can see is a behavior of mine and a tendency that I have in this process is asking double questions, therefore making it hard for whoever I'm talking to or whoever I'm interviewing to be able to give me a good answer or to keep up even with what the question was, because it had multiple parts to it.
Yeah, that I should have brought that up. And that's something that certainly happens all the time in quantitative research. You know, we'll have a list of attributes and it will say fun to eat and great tasting. I mean, nobody puts that together, but they'll put two things together and you'll say to your customer, I think we have to break that out because they're really different things.
Yeah.
And then you go back and forth on that. And it's the same on qualitative. You know, the truth is, though, we have to work with what we have. And unfortunately, when there are times when there's so much that we have to ask, sometimes we do have some layers of a question in there. I mean, it doesn't work a lot of times when you're, you're in a personal relationship and you ask two things in one question and neither get answered. So I think that's probably what you're alluding to.
Yes.
And I try and watch out for that. I'm not perfect. And, like I said, you go back to how do I make this all work with people, especially people I don't know and I'm going to have a fleeting relationship with. They know I'm a human being from the get-go. I'm not a robot, and I'm very natural with them and friendly, not overly friendly, but friendly. I mirror who they are to the best that I can. And you know what? If I stumble over my words or I put two things together or I make a word salad, as I sometimes do, then I chuckle at myself. And they appreciate that because most people have gone through the same thing.
Yeah. So I've done my due diligence. I've prepared the interviewee. I've created great questions. I made sure the interview is conducted perfectly the way you just taught me. Now it's time for me to come through the data. How do I make sure that the truth emerge and encumbered from my biases and without my preconceived notion, or even the answer that I hope for leaking through the data?
Yeah, that's another great question. There's a lot to answer there and more, not because you double-barreled it, but because there's just a lot to answer there. See, I was listening. But I'll just give a top line on that. I believe in my experience, and it's been many years that I've been doing research, that one goal of the research is to confirm or disprove ingoing hypotheses. So you might be starting out someplace and you want to see, is that the truth or not, or is there some gradation of that, which there often is. I personally am agnostic on the type of research that I'll do. I don't have to be an expert in a certain topic. I'm not a human resource person, but I'm a people person, and I can speak to people and integrate in whatever it is that I'm charged to find out. For myself, somehow, because I'm so present with the person I'm interviewing with, I'm not thinking about what the client would like to know or where they hope that this would go. I may not be as successful at that in my personal life, and maybe I don't have to, but my research depends on it. So somehow I come there with a filter and just try and put it out of my head. Not always easy to do, but that gets back to being present. Absolutely being present.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I think this answer applies for letting the truth emerge from the research as it is, being present with someone, empathizing with someone, and suspending just for a moment the chatter in your mind and the judgment so that you can actually hear and understand what the person in front of you is saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I try and work with an uncluttered desk. Doesn't always happen, but really to put aside all these other things. I'm a fan of I think it's Amy Cuddy's power pose. She does the Wonder Woman power pose, and I'm a big fan of that before an interview, especially for the first one of a project, to go in the mirror and do my superhero power pose. Absolutely. To kind of clear my mind. And so that's part of being present too, just being ready to gear yourself up, be excited, be ready. Again, I'm going on Broadway, so I want to be excited. I want to have that, I don't know if it's nervous energy or just an energy of being really excited to be with that person. And I hope that that shows through as well when I speak to people.
And that's a very important point, because energy transfers, right? Like when I'm in the sales process, I have to transfer enthusiasm. I have to transfer excitement. I have to transfer confidence so that the client in front of me, the person I'm trying to sell to, can receive and feel, and we can vibrate at the same level of frequency. So I've done everything right. I even managed to collect all the data that I need perfectly. I'm coming through it. I think I've successfully put myself, my biases aside. Now is perhaps the most important part, is presenting the data. You know, I think as important as valuable as everything we talked about so far is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the part where you actually have to present the data might be even more important. And sometimes I know I fall flat, and researchers fall flat. So how do we make sure that we don't fumble the ball at the 10-yard line?
Well, I'm just going to disagree. The only time I've disagreed with you is that I think more important than the presentation or the storytelling thereof is first you got to get the story. So we've talked about that. If we don't have the story, or we've elicited the information we need for whomever we're speaking to, a client, a colleague, a stakeholder, a respondent, then we're not having the presentation. And then we're getting this data and we're looking at themes. Qualitative is a whole other ball game on looking at data, because you're really looking at what could be disparate points. You're talking to 15 different people and they say it in different ways. Now you have to listen and look at your notes and say, what are the common themes that are going through here, regardless of how they say it. Now, how they say it could be important for positioning or something else, naming, what have you. But when you get to the presentation, again, I think it's being authentic. It's having energy. If that's who you are, I've seen plenty of presenters who don't have a high level of energy, but they're really good presenters. I happen to have a high level of energy when I present, sometimes a little too much. When I was doing presentations in person, I would love to walk around the room, because it just gave, kept sort of people on their toes and, get them more involved. And when I present, say to people who are in the audience, whether they're on a tile on the screen or in person, Junior, does that, I know you're particularly interested in this part of the deck. Does that help you, or do you need some clarification? Pausing to find out if anyone has any questions, because it's their meeting more than it's my meeting. So it's really figuring out what story you have to tell, and tell it in a way that brings all this together and ultimately is answering the questions and makes the client feel that they achieved what they needed to achieve, even if it's not the answer they wanted. And we've had plenty of those for sure.
I am so glad you disagreed with me, because it allowed me to actually clarify. What I meant with my question was exactly what you said. I didn't mean the delivery, I meant the story, right? Like,
yes,
I meant the story. So, and I'm so glad that you were able to correct and clarify that piece, because really, I think, especially when we do quantitative research, that people do not respond well to numbers and data and facts and figure, that the best way to convey all the research and the findings is usually through stories. So that's actually what I meant. And like, what is the best way for us to see a story emerge and to craft that story in a way that is compelling, in a way that is easy for people to digest, in a way that is memorable, and hopefully influential enough to elicit action?
I think it depends on the story you're telling and for whom you're speaking with. So, many of our clients, as I'm sure for others, have templates for presentations that we pretty much have to follow. Some want more data than less. when you're doing quantitative and you've got all kinds of charts, how can you boil it down to the most important thing when you know that there's going to be someone in the room who wants the 3 metrics you didn't show? I think on qualitative, in some regards, it's easier because I've just spent time speaking to these 10 or 15 or 20, sometimes 25 people or what have you, and I'm hearing their stories. Okay, it may relate to their work, it may relate to their personal life. I'm hearing their stories. Now I'm going to take their stories and make a cohesive umbrella and then break out the different characters. So you think of, I'm going to pick New York, that play with Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro. There may be an overarching theme. If I can make it here, I can make it anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But some people had it easier than others, or some people's challenges along the way were different. And I want to bring that out so they know it's not a totally rosy picture, or here are the barriers you may face with your customers if they've either had this experience prior or there's something else in the way, like too much competition or what have you. So these days, a lot of pictures tell the story, few words on the page, not always easy again. I work with the clients closely of what they like, and summing it up. And then the last part of it is, besides summing it up into, the 5 things you need to know or the 7 things you need to know, is I always love to put in some recommendations or considerations to think about. Maybe they've thought about some of this even before the research, but when they see it all on one page, just some bullet points of things to consider for process, for marketing, for something else, it kind of comes to light. That's exactly what we needed. I had one person say to me, some senior marketing person at a digital service company said to me, "Sue, after seeing all of this information, I'm now banging my head against the screen." I said, "Nobody's given me that compliment before." And he said, "No, what I mean is I'm realizing now from this story, there's so much we didn't know and so much we need to do. Some of it we're doing, but we're not doing it enough. And we need to, ratchet up to really make our message come through." Yeah. So I might have gone a little roundabout on that story question, but I think working with the client and understanding how they like to see things is certainly a good starting place.
Yeah. We are unfortunately coming to the end of our conversation, which I can believe we're already here. But I would be remiss then to not close with a question that allow me again selfishly to learn from you, who is so fluent in people, what you have learned about people through your years of talking, working with, interviewing people. What have you learned about us as human beings, as people, that's not always reflected in the public discourse or the way we treat each other or the general belief we have about humanity?
2 things come to mind, Junior, and thanks for asking that. One is, I really do believe that we have more in common than we do in terms of having differences. Yes, we might have different incomes, our skin might be different, our orientation in different ways may be different. I like to believe, because I'm an optimist, or mostly an optimist, that people want good outcomes. Where we differ maybe is how we get there, what we think about how we get there. But I do like to think that we're more similar in wanting what's good, but we might have different opinions or beliefs how to get there. The second thing is, I'm sorry to go against maybe conventional wisdom. You can't judge a book by its cover. I mean, the things I've seen on qualitative interviews where people come on screen, you talk about, a bias, because I think we all have biases in all different ways. I mean, even a bias that I don't like chocolate, I like vanilla. That's a small bias, but they'll come on screen and I assume, and I shouldn't, just based on something I'm seeing, oh boy, what's going to happen? And you know what? They open their mouth, they're a killer interviewee. Yeah. So I think we've got to give people a chance to be themselves, get to know them. And I think that's kind of where we started, Junior. It takes a lot of time to build a relationship. Fortunately, we sometimes have that experience, you know, that we can do that just in life. And I think getting to know people and what they're about instead of making a judgment on why they're doing something, I think that's really key. And again, we could go on about that. It's just such a wonderful question.
Yeah, well, I could not have scripted a better way to end this conversation. I think ending on this note of really accepting and believing in the common thread that stitch our human race together, and being able to see and hear ourselves in other people, as well as what you said at the end is really just assuming the best in people and letting them maybe lose our trust instead of having to work so hard to earn it.
Yeah.
So, Sue, this has been such an amazing conversation. I already knew you will be a wonderful guest. That's why I asked, and you have exceeded my expectations. I am so grateful for you having made the time to be here and to exchange and to educate me on how I can be a better researcher and how I can be more empathetic and be even more fluent in people. Thank you.
Thank you, Junior. It was a pleasure. I'm so happy you asked me. I feel really honored that you asked me, and in turn to learn from you and what you're doing with Empathy Led. That's truly amazing as well. So thanks for that. Thanks for all of it.
Of course. Thank you.